Hey, you guys doing? Welcome to the Black and Blue podcast. My name is Dale. I'm your host. This is Black and Blue Live. This is my second edition of Black and Blue. I really appreciate you for joining us here today. I've got a panel of guests that we're going to talk about some things that that are going on in the world today. Thank everybody that's joining us right now on Facebook Live, YouTube, Periscope, and on Twitch. Again, I've got a panel of guests here. Let me introduce our first one here. Our first guest here on the panel here is a second-year law student at Pepperdine University here in California. He recently completed an internship on Capitol Hill with a member of Congress. Everybody welcome in Jordan Hamilton. Where you at? There you go.
Hey, what's up, guys?
Sorry, we got a little. There you go, Jordan Hamilton. What's going on, brother? Good. Glad to see you. Glad to see you. All right. Our next guest here is a retired. He retired from law enforcement after 24 years with the Waterbury, Connecticut Police Department. He retired at the rank of captain. He was an instructor in defensive tactics, implicit bias, and civil complaints. He commanded the department's internal affairs and training divisions. Everybody help me welcome in Captain Lawrence Hunter.
Hey.
How you doing, sir?
Good, sir. Thank you.
Glad to have you. Glad to have you.
Glad to be here.
All right. Our next guest, she is the academic dean and professor for graduate studies at Northwood University in Texas. She's the co-author of the book, The Demotivated Employee. She's also a member of the Higher Learning Commission's peer review corps. Everyone, please help me welcome in Dr. Tara Peters.
Hello, everyone. Glad to be here.
Good to see you. Good to see you. And last but certainly not least, he has 24 years in law enforcement. He has been awarded 2 life-saving medals and 1 Star of Merit Medal. He's worked in specialty assignments like bike patrol, auto theft detail, and homeless outreach. He's also a defensive tactics instructor and a field training officer. Everyone help me welcome in Brad Grants.
Hi, good evening.
How you doing?
Doing good.
All right. So let me bring everybody on the panel here. All right, good to see everybody. So, we've got a lot of things going on in this world. We'll definitely touch on those things right now. In full disclosure, let me get going here before we go in there. As you can see, the name Tara Peters. In full disclosure, Tara is my cousin. It's been a while since we've seen each other.
Much
she's
love.
out in Texas, but just want to get that out there. And and everybody else on the panel, I'm not related to. So, all right. So greetings. We've got a couple people on Facebook. I'd just like to show everyone greetings from Pablo Mendez. Looks like he's greetings from Costa Rica, and greetings from Jordan Lovato. So thank you for joining us. We'll be sure to get more of your comments on there as well. So, like I said, we've got a lot of things going on in our world. Namely, what we've got is the George Floyd case. So I want to ask everyone on the panel one by one, what did you think about the George Floyd incident, and what do you think about the ensuing protest that took place after that? Let's start off with you, Jordan.
Well, when I saw the video, the first thing that went through my head was complete shock. You're not expected to see these things. Police officers generally aren't supposed to kill citizens. It threw me off guard. And the reactions, it was, I understand why people are angry and why they would resort to, looting and rioting, but I don't know, some of the protests, I'm a fan of peaceful protests. I'm not a fan of violent protests, but yeah, that's kind of how I feel about the situation.
Yeah, definitely. What about you, Lawrence? What did you think the first time you saw that video?
I was devastated. Remember, we're coming off the Ahmaud Arbery killing. And so you take Ahmaud Arbery, you take Breonna Taylor, you take Amy Cooper in New York, and of course, you add them all together, and you got this mix of these incidents that just don't seem to be letting up. And I can go back to the beginning of my law enforcement career. When I first started, we had in 1999, we had Amadou Diallo, And then we've had numerous incidents throughout the year. So this is just another incident. I was already traumatized after seeing the Arbery killing, and it was just more trauma, more devastation, more heartbrokenness on my end to watch another man be murdered by the hands of police in such a cold and callous way. It was really very devastating for me to watch that.
Yeah, definitely. And Brad, what'd you think about it when you saw that video for the first time?
My first thought was that guy is either arrogant, scared, or stupid, and I think all three of them are more than enough to eliminate him from the job and put him in jail. And then that kind of transferred to and I'm no way trying to paint myself as a victim, but now it's kind of transcended so much more, and now it's just become hurt. It hurts that this guy did something that painted all of us in such a bad way. And even though it sparked conversation, and I think it's going to spark change, it's still a heinous thing that was done. I mean, it is what it is.
Yeah, definitely. And last, how about you, Dr. Peters? What did you think about that when the first time you saw it?
Well, I was horrified by what I saw. And I even posted about what struck me the most about the incident was a 46-year-old grown man calling out for his mother. And to think about the condition that he had to be in to call out for his mother, that's dire. And just the callousness, as others have alluded to, that happened in that video. I cried about it and was emotional about it. And it's devastating that in 2020, again, the context has already been given. You've had Ahmed, you've had the Amy Cooper incident, you have Breonna Taylor, but really you can call the roll. In terms of the history of these kinds of incidents happening with African Americans. And then as for the protest, we have a constitutional right to peaceful protest. And so I support that. I understand the rioting. I know that I don't believe that it's right, but I understand it. And, people have talked about, Dr. King talking about rioting as the voice of the unheard. And in some regards, if you just empathize for a moment and think about the plight of African Americans in this country, you can understand that, why there would be this frustration and anger that, again, manifested itself in a way that resulted in rioting and also the looting. But also, as I watched those protests too, I saw opportunists taking advantage of the situation for their own personal gain.
Yeah, definitely. I want to ask you guys, what do you think will happen as far as change due to these protests and due to these, speaking out on what's happening? We've got, everyone across the globe is universally saying that, what happened was a travesty and we need to speak up and do something about it. What do you think tangible will happen as far as change? What do you think, Brad?
Well, I think if we kind of have a flow chart or a priority list, the first priority is that justice needs to be done for George. I think all four of those guys are complicit, even though the one guy, Chauvin, I think is his name, had his knee on his neck. To me, all the other three that were holding him down as well are every bit complicit because they didn't take any action to stop it. So first and foremost, justice needs to be done for him. And I pray that it is done. In the aftermath of it, this needs to start. The conversation needs to start. And I think most importantly is it never needs to stop. I think in the past we've had incidents that occurred and we had discussions and roundtables and think tanks and stuff. And we might have had some short-term change, but I think that these conversations need to continue until we reach that point. One of the sayings that I heard that it just strikes me, it's convicting, but until I look at you and I see me and you look at me and you see yourself, then we're not in the right place yet.
Yeah, definitely. Jordan, what did you think about these protests? Did you get involved? Did you go out and protest any?
So I didn't protest. There weren't any locally in my area. But I like when people gather together for a cause, because I think it goes back to kind of the heart of our country. It's a well-informed democracy, and if you're obviously, if you're well-informed, you're outraged, and if you're outraged, you're protesting. Um, but like the professor was saying, there were a lot of opportunists. I don't necessarily see how someone running into a store and grabbing an item that they need is going to do anything for justice for George. I don't see how that's going to bring about change in the police force. I think peaceful protesting is good because it sends a message that people are unified for something, and hopefully change can come from that. But I don't necessarily agree with violent forms of protesting or destruction of property.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people have died, have been injured during these protests all across the country, and that doesn't serve, you know, the whole cause of George Floyd, because the message is lost now. People are, you know, talking about the rioters. They're talking about the cleanup now. It seems like a lot of that has quelled now, and I'm glad for that. I know in my city, we've had some peaceful protest, and we haven't had to deal so much of that. But you know, cities nearby to us have had a lot to deal with. So it's terrible all the way around. So um, a lot of this, what we're talking about, is not just what happened with George Floyd. I know a couple of you touched on the fact that other people have been victims of police brutality over the years, but it goes deeper than that. It goes deeper than just people dying. It goes to the systemic racism, and I know some people just want to quote numbers now. Let me show you some numbers here that people are quoting as far as what's going on here. We've got U.S. police shootings of blacks disproportionately affected. Of course, you know, we've got in deaths 30 million people, but only 1,200 back in 2015. But then there, you know, these stats are from Statista. People are saying that blacks are actually not being killed as much as whites. And I would say, okay, that maybe that is true, maybe it's not. But I would like to say that it goes deeper than that. It goes to, you know, harassment by police. It goes to harassment by society in general. It goes. Remember the lady in Central Park? Remember how she said she was going to call the police on the black man who was just, you know, telling her to leash her dog. Why does she feel that she could do that? Because, you know, our society allows that. And it, you know, just going into that, I hate to see that. I hate to know that that's what's going on in my world. I want to ask people on the panel, have you had any instances, any negative instances that we can talk about on camera about you being harassed or stopped by the police, and how did that happen? What was the outcome of that? And then on the flip side, we'll talk about any positive interactions, because obviously, you know, that's a small minority. How about you, Tara? Have you had any negative interactions with the police over your years?
So I haven't personally, but I'll speak to an incident with my son, Janera. So I've raised an African American son, and you know, Janera's gone to college and law school and is now an adult, and he's a practicing attorney. But when Janera was probably about 16 years old, he had a hoopty. I mean, his granddad had gotten the car for $100, right? And so, but as many of you know, African American parents have to have the talk, and when you talk about an African American community, everybody knows what you mean. It's that conversation. When you get pulled over by the police, here's what you do and here's what you don't do. Because your job, you have one job, and that's to get home safely. And then anything else that happened in that interaction, we can deal with it later, but I can't deal with it if you are injured or worse. And so he had been stopped by a police officer. No real reason given for him being, you know, pulled over, other than he was likely in a part of town in a certain vehicle that he didn't look like he belonged. And so in that part of that conversation, the police officer makes this assertion that, you know, the ignition looks like, you know, it's been, you know, messed with. And so, you know, the car could therefore be stolen. And Janera's like, dude, you have to be kidding me. This car costs $100. Why would anybody go and steal, you know, this car? But just the idea that, you know, young black male, you look like you're out of place, and so, you know, therefore, you know, I'm gonna pull you over. And so, you know, again, those are fortunately that didn't, went fine, and Janera got home safely and we had a chance to talk about it. But it's always that concern that you're going to be profiled. And so you have to be on your P's and Q's and do everything right so that you don't put yourself in a situation where you might end up with an adverse outcome.
Yeah, definitely. Let me ask you, Brad, real quick. When police officers are out doing their job, patrolling, what do you think it is that they're looking for to be proactive? I know, a lot of times they're out, handling calls for service, but when they have free time to be out and be proactive to stop crime, what is it that they're looking for our viewers?
Well, I think first, I would preface it by saying, if you are trying to do the right thing for the right reason, then your actions will be different than if you're somebody who has a different agenda. I haven't met many people in this job that have a different agenda, a racist agenda, but there are those in our profession that fall under that. But your question, I think you have to identify crime trends, meaning the location that they occur in, what crimes are occurring in that particular area. Most departments have areas of responsibility. We call them beats. And so you have to address what crime issues you're having in your beat, what time of day they occur, what's the general, is it auto theft? Is it car burglary? Is it residential burglary? Is it narcotic sales? And then you should direct your patrol appropriately to address those issues. So what you're looking for really depends on what is plaguing the particular area that you're responsible for.
Yeah, I wanted to get into that because, people will say I was stopped because I'm Black, when actually it could be, a number of things. It could be actually, yes, that you did a illegal move while you didn't stop for the stop sign, you didn't signal, what have you. And, so like you said, Brad, not all cops are out there trying to do things with a negative heart. They're actually out there trying to do their job, enforce traffic laws, enforce criminal laws and things like that. How about you, Jordan? Have you had any negative interactions with police in your short time on this planet? You're only, 23, 24?
Yeah, 23.
Yeah.
Thankfully, I haven't had anything that's been extremely radicalizing to me where I'm like abrasive in any police encounters. I've been driving for about 2.5 years now. I've been pulled over 2 times, and the first time, I definitely think my race played a role. I was coming home from school. I go to school in Malibu, like rich area or whatever, by the beach, overwhelmingly white. And so I was at school for a long time working on an assignment. I left the library around 2:30 in the morning, and to get onto the major freeway, you've got to go from like a canyon taking you to the beach, like inwards through the hills. And so I'm driving one way, and it's a one-way canyon. So the cops are coming the opposite way, and then I'm driving past them, and I noticed they kind of turned around, and then they were like following me for a bit, and then they decided to pull me over. And they said they pulled me over because my tags were bad, and they had they expired. Like, I remember this because it was, I want to say, like the first week of February, and my tags had January on them, so I just hadn't got them paid yet. So they said they pulled me over because of my tags, and then the officers were talking to me, and they were like, well, you don't have any warrants, right? Like, you're going to be good if you don't have any warrants. And I feel like they only pulled me over to see, because I was a Black kid going through the hills of Malibu, to see if I had any warrants.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of that could be exactly what they said, but it all is the perception of the person receiving that. If you feel like that, if how they came off to you, if they weren't professional, if they were snickering, if they were, condescending, then of course you're going to feel like that. So, that's why I'm bringing up these things. How about you, Captain Hunter? You've been in law enforcement a long time, but we still all have these stories as well about still being pulled over, still being spoken to by other officers. How about yourself?
Yeah, so I really don't have any stories like that. I became an officer when I was a little bit younger than Jordan there. I was 22, and I was never pulled over, never harassed. I can remember being in the police academy and them asking, how many times you've been pulled over, and they're asking me, and I said never. And the instructor couldn't believe that as a young black kid I was never pulled over, but it was just true. I do have a story about what I witnessed, and I thought it was a little bit of harassment on the officer's part. So my friends and I, we were probably 15 or 16 or so, maybe even younger, 14, 15, 16, somewhere around there. We were walking to our local boys club to go play basketball, which is something we did every day. We finish our homework, and 4, 5, 6 o'clock in the afternoon, we're walking to the boys club to go play basketball. And we, as we're going, we see now we're walking on the street. We all walked in the middle of the street, nothing irregular, unusual about that. And there was another group of guys, and we're all going the same direction. We didn't know them, and they didn't know us. So pulls up behind us is a squad car, and the squad car, these guys jump out, and they go to the other group of guys. Now they were probably older than us. I don't know how old they were, in mid-20s, I would say. And the way that the officers were talking to them was ridiculous. One guy was saying, "Listen, I told you guys to walk on the sidewalk. Why are you walking in the middle of the street?" It's what we did in my neighborhood. We all walked in the middle of the street, because if you walked on the sidewalk, a dog could come out of some area or something along those lines. So I didn't appreciate that, and that kind of gave me a nasty taste in my mouth for law enforcement. I didn't think it was necessary, everything that they were doing and how they were talking to them. But at the end of the day, these guys didn't get roughed up, they didn't get beat up or anything, but it just kind of set a bad impression for me. Obviously it wasn't too bad of an impression, because I became a law enforcement officer years later. But that's really the only story that I have about harassment. I've heard about it, but that's the only one that I could say that I have ever seen anything like that.
Yeah. Okay. So, these are stories that, I've had these experiences myself. Well, I won't get into those. But like you just said, it didn't affect you so much that you wouldn't join in law enforcement. Some of my experiences were kind of made me want to go join law enforcement even more, so that, there would be one less problem. There would be, one person out there that, someone wouldn't have to worry about unnecessarily. But there are a whole lot of, more good cops out there than there are bad cops. You hear people now, the big question now, everyone is saying, why don't good cops speak up? They do speak up every day on this world. The only thing is that you don't see it on the news, you don't see it on social media. That's because it's just such a routine thing. Say like in the George Floyd case, another officer that I worked with a great group of people, and they wouldn't have allowed that to happen. They would have, just gone up to someone else and just say, hey, get your knee off of. That doesn't get reported because actually, there's nothing to report. You can't prove a negative. So if there's nothing to report, your news isn't going to go there. But this happens daily. There's more calls for service than you can imagine. Millions of cops out there dealing with millions of people every day on calls for service. And this is a minuscule amount. However, this minuscule amount is enough that makes people out there feel concerned, feel worried, feel concerned. So, we want to talk about this. I got a little video that I want to show real quick. I got this from the California Post, and it goes to what we were talking about, perceptions in law enforcement. So check this out.
I knew I was going to get pulled over.
What do you mean?
I've been working all day. I'm just trying to get to the store, go home. But I'm a black man. I'm wearing a hoodie. And I knew I was screwed.
I didn't know you were black when I stopped you. I was right across the intersection from you, and you rolled through the stop sign.
Yeah, well, a lot of people do, but I feel like I'm the one who gets stopped all the time.
I'm sorry you feel that way. I don't know why you may have been stopped before, but I can only tell you why I stopped you tonight. It's because you ran the stop sign, nothing else.
you understand how scared I am when I get pulled over?
Tell me why you're scared.
Cops get nervous when they pull over a black guy. And I don't know how this is gonna end. I just don't want to get shot.
Okay, I get it. Been a lot of things causing mistrust, but I never know what's going to happen either when I make a traffic stop. I want you to be able to trust the police, to trust me. I don't want you to be scared.
You're the first cop I've talked to that understands there's problems. And I think that maybe if I could talk to other cops like this, I don't know, I'd be less afraid.
If we could all talk like this, maybe everyone would be less afraid.
Will you remember this conversation when you come to my car? It matters. More than you know.
What's up, buddy? Good evening, sir.
Good evening.
That was some powerful stuff right there. That was from the Commission of Peace Officer Standards and Training out here in California, and it goes to really listening to what the other person, the other side has to say, and what they're feeling. So that's what all that was about, and that's why I wanted to get that on there. Lawrence and Brad, what do you think the perception of law enforcement and African American or people of color communities are right now? How about when you work, Lawrence? And right now, when you're working, Brad, what do you think that perception is? Go ahead, Brad.
I feel like there's distrust. I certainly think some of it's warranted, but I also think that some of it is a product of what the narrative the media wants to push. And so, this event needs to motivate us to change. We have to look at ourselves. We can't sit back in a righteous pose anymore and just say that we're right and everybody else is wrong. We absolutely need to look at ourselves, look at ways that we should change. And once we kind of heal ourselves, then I think we can do a better job of going out into the community and building trust. But if we don't look inward and try and fix ourselves and heal ourselves and look at things that we should do, look at ways that we should change, it seems kind of disingenuous if we go out into the community trying to portray ourselves as, oh, we want to change, we want to, have dialogue, we want to improve relations with people. We really have to look at ourselves first, look at what we should change, look at things that we need to do differently, and then try and take our message further to the community.
Yeah. How about you, Lawrence? Captain Hunter, what do you think?
Yeah, so I think that it depends on the place and the time, the circumstances, and all that kind of stuff. Just the Black community is certainly diverse, so we cannot always, think that because one officer does one thing, that all officers are doing this thing. And certainly we should not think that the same about the Black community. During my time, during my research, we find out that roughly 8 in 10 white persons have a favorable view of the police. Well, that number is not much less for Black communities. It's actually 6 in 10. 6 in 10 people have a favorable view of the police. Now, certainly the incidents that we're talking about here are not helping with that view, and certainly there are dips and highs and lows and all that kind of stuff. But generally, the Black community wants the police. They want the police in the neighborhood. They have a favorable view of the police. However, when something happens, as that video showed, they want procedural justice. Procedural justice is essentially that the police officers are going to handle everything that happens in a professional, consistent, and organized manner, right? So if I file a complaint, they want to know that the complaint is going to be taken seriously. They're going to complete and utter review of all the facts and circumstances are going to take place, and then there's going to be a just outcome. That is what the Black community is looking for. We're not looking for a special outcome, special treatment, or anything like that. We just want to know that when we call the police, or when a white person calls the police, that the same treatment is going to happen. So, in my time in law enforcement, as long as you treated people fairly and they knew who to trust and all that kind of stuff, then we would get some really good outcomes.
Yeah.
And
Dr.
Dale, if I could,
Yeah.
I was going to say, if I could jump in here for just a
Yeah, go
second,
ahead.
I was going to comment on two things. I was going to say, one, to Brad's point, I do think that the media does shape the narrative to some extent, but this narrative about the procedural justice that was just referenced, that narrative already existed prior to media. It existed because of data and research that showed that there were distinctions in terms of how Blacks were being treated by white police officers. And there's history there in terms of how policing actually started in this country. It was not to protect and serve as it related to communities of color. Let's talk about African Americans. It was really to keep us in our place. And to make sure, again, in the origination of it, it was a slave patrol. So there is a historical context there, again, where that narrative was shaped long before the media. The other thing that I would say, too, what struck me in that video was that the young woman stood up to film. That we live in a time where there is a belief in the African American community that we need to film what actually takes place in terms of police encounters, because we don't believe that there's procedural justice with what is going to transpire. And because of that, there's this belief, and that results in behavior that says, okay, we need to videotape this incident. And in fact, think about what the outcome would be with the George Floyd situation if that 17-year-old young woman had not had the courage to videotape that entire incident, and we had the police officer's words against a dead man and an audience of witnesses. Who would have won that argument were it not for the video evidence? And the last thing I'll say is, to that point, I think it's good to point out that there is trust in the African American community, 6 out of 10. But that difference, 6 out of 10 and 8 out of 10, I haven't looked at the research, but that's probably statistically significant. So it does suggest that, again, there are significant differences in perceptions around how police officers are viewed in terms of African American communities versus those who are white. And I think that understanding is important because it gives us a starting place for the conversation and allows for police officers to listen, like you saw in that video, the position of the African American community, what our experiences are, and to acknowledge that, and then to say, okay, what can we do? How can we move forward? Because action has been taken, but I mean, I got to be honest, living outside of the policing culture, it's shocking to me in 2020 that we have to have an 8 can't wait protocol that includes officers telling other officers, when they see bad behavior, to call it out. And like the Dallas Police Force is now making that a part of their policies. That's just a head scratcher to me in 2020 that we have to say that. But again, that's where we are. And so it's not just having the policy, but it's the accountability. Because I understand that Minnesota, right, have this policy in place that police officers are supposed to call out other police officers when they see inappropriate behavior, but it didn't happen. And so why did that occur?
Right.
Yeah. Can I jump in as well?
Yeah, go ahead.
So I absolutely agree with that. And I think that many times culture really shapes the way that police departments work, and it's really unfortunate. And in the same way that Minnesota is now taking a look at that particular, or they had that policy, but it was never enforced or whatever. They're now taking a look at in banning chokeholds. I mean, why are we banning chokeholds now in 2020 when we had Eric Garner back in 2014? And even when we had Eric Garner, we understand that they were violating policies, and the policy was set back in 1993. So what is going on here? Why did this happen? And so there's a notorious sluggishness, slowfulness on executive parts as far as employing new techniques, looking at their policies and procedures, and going forward. I mean, in today's time, if tomorrow, as we record this, tomorrow's Monday, if a police executive, chief of police, doesn't call his command staff in and say, we're going to take a look at every single one of our policies, then there's something wrong with that police department, because there's no way that we should be thinking about banning chokeholds today when that stuff we knew about Eric Garner in 2014, and NYPD banned it, I believe, in 1993. It's just insane to me that this is going on.
Yeah, definitely. Before we move on, I want to let everybody know, thank you for joining us on all the platforms right now, on Facebook, YouTube, Periscope, Twitch. And I thought I had IG, Instagram going, but I think we got kicked out of that. But like I said, your comments and questions are welcome. And so let me poke one right up here. This one's from YouTube. Tamoy26 would like to ask, would it be counterproductive for more Black people to join their local police department? Well, probably not, but let me let you answer that one there, Brad. What do you think?
You know, there's two parts to my answer. One, absolutely, because our force, I mean, at its core function, we're supposed to serve the people. And so if we're going to do that, if we're going to do the people's will, then I think that our makeup should resemble the population. So for starters, that's one. Secondly, I feel like we kind of have to lift this veil of secrecy on our profession. We're not the CIA. We're not SEAL Team 6. We should let anybody who wants to watch, anybody who wants to come in, look at our training, come out and ride along with us and see. So that, I mean, because in the absence of information, people are going to create their own narrative. And so I think we really need to lift this veil of secrecy. And that's what I was referring to earlier. Like, we need to look at ourselves, look at changes that we should make so that we can hold ourselves better before we try and go out into the community and get better relations with other people. You know, like kind of heal thyself before we head out. And so I absolutely think that more people of color need to get involved in law enforcement. But even if they don't have that desire, I would hope that as a result of this, there can just be more freedom for anybody to come out and ride along with us, see our training, even take part in some of our training. And so it really puts you in a spot of kind of understanding a little bit more of what's going on our side as well. And maybe that will be one of the steps towards healing that we can talk about in the future. Yeah,
definitely. Hey, Jordan, so I know that you are a law student. Had you had any ideas of joining law enforcement? Because I think that's, part of the solution is, we get more people of color in all walks of life, actually, so that we can make some change. I always tell kids, let's be part of the solution, not part of the problem. And just like what Brad was saying there, what about yourself? You ever thought about law enforcement? Any of your friends in law enforcement or thinking about law enforcement?
Well, yeah, I definitely agree with what Brad was saying on how the community should actually become involved with law enforcement, because that way they're representative of the people who they're serving. Personally, I went into law school with the intention of becoming a district attorney. I felt like I wanted to kind of give back to my community and I guess serve in that position, and then also to kind of be, because I know the kind of person I am, and I want to make sure that justice is there at every level. So I wanted to kind of be able to enter the district attorney's department to kind of make sure that things were running the right way. And last summer, I did an externship with the Los Angeles district attorney. It was a summer externship. And after that externship, I don't know if I want to do that for a living anymore. But
why is that?
I don't think it fits my personality. I feel like I would be better on the other side, kind of representing, I guess, the little guy. I felt like the district attorney's office was sort of like a large entity, and I would feel better if I was kind of on the other side helping out the little guy. But that's just personal preference.
Yeah, yeah. I've noticed in my career, and the cops on the panel can probably attest to that as well. That DA's offices, they're swamped, they're overwhelmed, they're short staffed, and it's kind of like a conveyor belt. Let's get one case in and let's move it out. Let's settle it. And a lot of them on both sides, on the public defender's office as well. They've got a lot of people on their plate that they just want to get through. So I think private attorneys. I don't know if you want to go that route, Jordan. If you want to go private, if you want to be a public defender, that's what's needed. So we can get more people of all walks of life. That whether it be Black, Latino, Asian, it's definitely needed. Definitely needed. So I know earlier we were talking about media shaping the narrative on a lot of these things. How do we think social media is a big part of what's going on now? How do we think social media can kind of shape on the other side what changes take place? I know Jordan, you're probably a big social media guy. You're younger.
Yeah.
I'm a little bit older than you. I'm a big social media guy too. What do you think? We'll start with you on that. How do you think social media can kind of shape this narrative?
I think social media is good because it provides a platform for people to kind of throw out maybe policy recommendations or ideas from other departments, and then like a common sense idea can kind of gain traction, and when it gains traction, more eyes are on it. So I think social media is kind of a good tool to kind of gauge the people's overall feelings about what needs to be done.
Yeah, definitely. How about you, Lawrence? You're a big social media guy. How do you think social media can kind of shape the narrative on the law
I
enforcement
see
side?
Dr. Peters laughing there. I don't. Yeah. I am not. I am not. I think that social media can be just as dangerous, or even more dangerous than regular media. When all this is going on, if I was scrolling through my feeds, I'm getting bad information, wrong information. I see people reposting stuff and saying, this is why we should, not get along with the police and things like that. And if you read the post or read the article, these posts were posted back in 2015, 2017. So social media can shape just as many negative perceptions and shape the narrative just as wrongly as many other people, as a regular media. So I think that people really need to be very careful about what they're consuming, who's putting out the information, and let's not forget. I mean, I hate to sound like a conspiracy theorist again, but the Russians did a lot with social media in guiding and steering the election, or so says the Mueller report. So we got to be very careful as to what we're consuming, where we're consuming it from. I usually try not to consume a story until I've read it in 2 and 3 different places and from reputable places. So we've got to be very careful about what we're consuming and how we're getting it.
Yeah. And there's also a movement now on social media and elsewhere about defund the police. Defund the police. I don't know how that's going to help. We've got a lot of problems that the police need to deal with. A lot of that theory is to take monies from the police departments and place them in other areas of concern within the city. What do you think about the defund the police movement, Tara?
So here's the thing. First of all, I think that you want to be careful about making a one-size-fits-all solution. And that's what, in my opinion, that's what defunding the police is about. Is there a need to look at how we fund police and what we pay and the things that we resource? Absolutely. So for example, do we want to try to demilitarize police forces? Do we want to take a look at funding and perhaps instead of sending police officers out on calls that maybe have more of a mental health component, that there are support resources that are available to police departments to help to deal with those circumstances? Because I recognize police officers have a lot on their plate and they're not necessarily equipped or trained to deal with mental health issues. So what I would say is I approach this, I'm a business school professor, so I see this as a problem to be solved. And one of the things that we do anytime we're looking at a situation is we want to get clear definition around the problem and what is actually going on. And once we get clear definition on that, then we can go about and gathering data. And again, to the point that Lance was making, Captain Hunter, triangulating data sources, right? So we have multiple sources of data. We know it's reliable. And we also look for data that is against a particular position that we hold. And then we use that to then inform the kinds of choices that we make. And then we make evidence-based decisions. And I have not seen the evidence around defunding the police to have an opinion, an informed opinion about it. But it seems to be a single solution to the problem. So to me, it's about looking at evidence-based solutions. And then this goes back to the next part of this is really once we roll out those evidence-based solutions, then we have this term in business we call closing the loop. So we go back and we gather feedback and we make a determination around whether or not the solution is yielding the kinds of results that we want. We do this all the time in business. We tweak it, we make changes to decisions that we make because, again, we're not perfect and we're not expecting police to be perfect. We know that mistakes get made. It's just that when deadly force gets used, we don't get to recover from that. And so that's really, to me, a cornerstone of the issue that we're trying to deal with here is the use of deadly force inside of police organizations. But again, it is a problem to be solved. We are really smart people. People come from all over the world to learn from us and to study here in the U.S. So we can fix it, but we have to have the willpower to make the decisions and to do the hard things.
Yeah, definitely. So did you want to say something there, Lawrence?
Yeah. I wanted to chime in and really agree with what she was saying. I was watching the news today, and the NYPD was talking about defunding or cutting back greatly on their budget. I mean, it's a $6 billion operation, and okay, if you cut half of that or $3 billion down to $3 billion or $4 billion or whatever, what services that are going to be lacking? And I get that you're going to put that into mental health or the homeless and other things, but I like the way that Dr. Peters was phrasing it. We've got to look at this evidence base, and I don't think that Mayor de Blasio should really be rushing out to make any type of rash decisions because of the frenzy that's going on. Okay, we got to do something. I think that would be a disastrous thing. Let's take our time. Let's analyze this. Let's take 6 months. Let's take a year, and let's roll out a policy here and there slowly in an effort to scale back on the amount of resources and the amount of responsibilities that the police are tasked to do. We all agree. I would think we all agree that the police are doing way too much and asked to do certain things. And I also believe that we should demilitarize as well, but let's not think that we should just immediately do it. Let's take our time and do this right. Otherwise, we'll have another big mess where police aren't responding and people are being hurt because there's no officers to respond to domestic violence or to handle accidents and et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. So, let's get back to the issue at hand was, police brutality and, interactions with communities of color. Brad, what do you think? Not what do you think, but what sort of training do police departments, or your department in particular, give officers on the subjects of bias policing and stuff like that? Is there any sort of training that's done in the academy, out of the academy, anything like that?
Well, as far as in the academy, it's been a long time since I've been to the academy, so I couldn't tell you exactly what's on their curriculum anymore. It's been a long time. I used to have hair when I went to the academy, so
So did we. I got nothing under this
You
hat.
still
Right.
have it. It's just relocated. That's all. That's all.
but this is all gray now. So. But I know that they have, the state has rolled out quite a bit of training in implicit bias and race-based policing and that stuff in recent years. I'll be completely honest. It seems a little bit disingenuous to me. I think we need to look at our hearts and where your heart's at. If your heart is in the right place, trying to do the right thing, then you'll be okay. If you're trying to cover up something that you did wrong, then we just need to be honest and admit what you did wrong. That kind of transparency is what needs to happen. I understand that we need to bring these issues up, but I mean, like what our training is essentially watching a video. I don't know if watching a video is really going to change anybody's life. If you came into this job and you got through the hiring process with, some racist ideologies, then, it's then the police department's job to kind of weed that out. It'll come out, it'll come to the surface. We need to do a better job of getting rid of people who fit that bill. But that being said, I've worked for 2 different agencies in Southern California. I can tell you, I really haven't worked with, I can't think of anybody off the top of my head who I thought that guy's racist. I think that we have some problems as far as how we view doing our job, how we view serving the public. There's too much of this us, them, meaning like them is the criminals, us, we're on our side. We're not at war, even though we call the war on crime. I think maybe that setting it in that context kind of sets the stage for maybe a bad mentality. We need to serve the public, stop people from doing bad things, but not try and become, turn our city into a war zone because we've decided, it's us and them and we have to win. So as far as implicit bias and racism, yeah, we're getting training, but I'm just really not sure if watching a video for an hour or 2 is really going to change somebody's life. That's something that our culture needs to change so that if you hold those viewpoints, you feel like an outsider, Yep. So instead of like being quiet when we see something, we probably need to do a better job of coming out and saying, that's not acceptable, man. We can't do that.
Yeah,
and
definitely.
if you keep down that road, you're not going to have a career because you're going to get fired.
Yep.
And I think we need to move in that direction because for too long, I kind of referenced it earlier, kind of have this veil of secrecy around our job or our tactics and our training. And I think that just needs to go away. We're citizens who do this job to protect other citizens. And we need to see it as that and less of going to war.
Right. Let me get a couple comments on here for the panel. This one's from YouTube. Keith Garrett's asked, Chief Gates once said, we get our officers from the community. Point. Community needs reconciliation. Doable, but difficult. Thoughts? Any thoughts on that? How about you, Tara? Any thoughts on that?
Yeah. So I think the hard things are worthwhile. And so the good news is that there are already models out there. There are police departments across the country who are already doing this very well in terms of having this community partnership. It's interesting because I believe the DOJ published this report almost 20 years ago about community policing. And it's really about this whole idea, right, of being building relationships, rapport with community, getting them involved, getting to what Brad was saying. It's not an us versus them. It is all of us in this together because 99% of the population is anti-criminal. So we're already right. I mean, we're already on the same page. I mean, so we don't have to fight that battle. And so I think it absolutely is doable, but I think we have to have the commitment to invest the time and the resources in order to make it to come about. But I think it's important because I know I've shared earlier that I have a son. Janera's just a little bit older than you, Jordan. But I would love for the two of you, when you get married and start your families, that your kids and our grandkids, you wouldn't have to have the talk with them. And I believe that if we begin to move in this direction, then African American families will stop having to have those talks with their children. But it is a collective, it is a collaborative. And I also think too that the community wants to partner with the police. I mean, we want to be advocates with you. We don't want to be your adversary, and we don't want you to view us as the adversary. We are not the enemy. We are partners in this together. And I think helping to change mindsets is really important. And I also think, to Brad's point as well, I can tell you now, I can save the police departments a lot of money. 2 hours of implicit bias training is not going to change behavior. So we can save you a lot of money on that, and talk to you about something that would be more constructive in terms of developing police officers. And I haven't heard though any conversation about how you guys actually deal with culture. And that's a function of the leadership structure inside of police departments, because all that cascades down. But there are many things that we can do. And again, going to the community to look for officers is one way that we can do that.
Yeah, absolutely. Let me get another comment in here real quick. We got from YouTube for Keisha Francesca, looks like, Garrett. How do we keep the conversation front and center so this does not become the flavor of the month? What do you think about that, Jordan?
I think it's just something that we have to kind of remind ourselves, and I don't think it would become the flavor of the month just because it's such a prevalent problem. The issues of police brutality and racism in the police force. I feel like I've constantly had even if it's a new national name every 3 months or so, these things keep on happening, and I think that plays into kind of just, we need to focus on that and keep talking about it and not let it forget.
Yeah, this time feels a little different, doesn't it, guys?
It's so egregious. It's Go ahead.
You had something, Lawrence. Go ahead, Lawrence.
Yeah, I really want to chime in on that, because this is really bothering me and really scaring me in all actuality, because as we've just mentioned, this has been going on for quite some time now. We can name off the list of people that this has happened to, and also not only about the deaths, but just the harassment, right? That we have talked about, right? And when I see chiefs of police and taking a knee during these protests and walking with the protesters, that's all well, fine and good, and that's great. But what's going to happen in 6 months from now, a year from now, when these politicians and these policymakers really take a look at what needs to change and they start rolling out these different policies? That's when we're going to need these chiefs and these different executives. It's one thing to get us to stop rioting, picketing, protesting in the streets today, but what we really need is reform tomorrow. And I'm talking 6 months down the road, a year from now. And so we have to keep agitating, and not let this be a movement. And that really kind of scares me, because we've been down this road so many times. We must not allow this to die down because of what Dr. Peter said. She wants her children, grandchildren, and I have kids, and every time I see one of these videos, I think about my kids. I think when I saw Sandra Bland, I think about my daughter, who's very outspoken. I have to tell her to be quiet sometimes, but I want their kids not to have that talk as well. And so that we must not let this die. We cannot let this be a flash in the pan.
Yeah.
Well,
absolutely.
if we can quote Killer Mike, because y'all know I'm heavily into rap.
When I saw you, I thought that. I'm like, she likes rap music.
Right. No, I know.
Y'all need to be up on Killer Mike. I mean, aside from his rap career, no, seriously, he's up on it. He's really well-spoken political guy. Go ahead, Tara.
And to that point, right? I mean, he gave really this direct speech around. He was speaking to the folks in Atlanta because they were cutting up a little bit. But he said 3 things: you need to strategize, plan, and prioritize. And to me, that's what this is about. What's the strategy, which results in the plan, which sets the priorities. And I think there's some obvious ways to think about that. The first thing is, and I think Brad said this, the first priority is you want justice for George Floyd and for his family. But we have to be able to walk and chew gum. So it means justice for George Floyd, justice for Ahmaud Arbery, and justice for Breonna Taylor. We can start right there. So justice for those three, that helps to create the focus. Then the next piece of this, from my vantage point, is voting. Because if we don't participate in the electoral process, when I'm talking about voting, I'm just not talking about the presidential election. Yes, that is important, and that has implications. But most of our lives are impacted on a day-to-day basis by state, city, local governments. And so we must vote in the fall, in any primaries that are still going on this summer, and then making sure that we have people in place who are going to represent our public interest. And one of those public interests is policing and what that looks like inside of African American communities. So I think that you have some clear priorities there in terms of what we can do. And what the other thing that I think is important, we already have a sense of urgency. Now we need to have some successes. And that creates energy and momentum for the next stage. Because just like you, Captain Hunter, I am concerned about, the loss of energy and momentum in this work. But I feel like if we can focus in on those three things and get to November, then that will give us the next step in terms of what needs to happen in terms of planning. It's hard to do because there are a lot of things competing for our attention and a lot of priorities with life. But from my vantage point, if we could focus on those two things, then we could get to an initial win and then using that to build momentum going forward.
Yeah, all right. I want to thank again everybody that's joining us on Facebook, YouTube, Periscope, and Twitch right now. Again, your comments or questions are welcome. Let me bring in another comment. This one's not from me, but here we go. We got Chief Joseph Paulino. He works for the San Bernardino School Police out here in California. He was a recent guest on the Black and Blue podcast. He asked, how do we keep the community engaged in keeping the police department in our communities accountable? How do we keep the community engaged? Anybody there? How do we keep the community engaged?
I would say that it's up to the police right now. I think that Brad brought this up before, but it's up to the police to really get out there and show themselves to be officer friendly, if you will. Have community meetings. Tell them that we want to engage with you. Have a conversation in which we want to listen to what your concerns are. How have we not listened to you before? This whole protest and this whole movement is because no one was listening before. And this is the powder keg that blew up. No one listened to Colin Kaepernick 4 years ago when he was kneeling. And now look at where we're at. So I think the police departments, chiefs of police, executives, mayors, district attorneys, right? Because if we talk about systemic justice, racism, systematic racism, and things like that, this is just not a police problem. These police officers who submit these reports, they go to a prosecutor, and the prosecutor many times signs off or doesn't believe or doesn't prosecute. We see that in the whole Arbery situation, where a number of prosecutors completely dropped the ball on this whole thing. So this is not just a policing problem. This is a prosecutorial problem. This is a mayoral city government problem. That was the problem in Ferguson, Missouri. The Ferguson, Missouri police department was in cahoots, obviously, with the local government, who told them, we want you to go out there and target African Americans and all that kind of stuff, right? And we had emails going on about that. So this goes back to what Dr. Peters was saying: vote these people out of office who do not have your best interests at heart. So I think it's going to take all of those particular entities, those stakeholders, to really sit down with the community, local churches, and what have you, and really have a good conversation and say, this is what we want, these are our demands, and help us to help you. As I like how Dr. Peter said it before as well, that the Black community wants to work with you. Yeah. We don't want to be an enemy. We don't want that, but we also don't want to be seen as an enemy either. So I think the first step really has to be the police and local governments taking that step forward. And then, of course, the community has to meet them as well.
Yeah, I think a little bit of what you guys touched on in the local government, things need to change as well, not just with the police, but with the DA's office, the mayor's office, the city council, all those things from the bottom up needs to happen. Kind of like what you were talking about, Jordan, when you went on your externship with the DA's office, how, you saw firsthand how these things work, and you decided you didn't want to be a part of that. Hopefully that you can, once you finish school and you enter law, that you can make a difference on whatever platform you decide to do that at. If you want to go onto, like I said before, the PDA's office, or you want to go private, or if, maybe you do want to go to the prosecution, the DA's office. We need young brothers like that, just in the system, to look at these cases, like Captain Hunter said, and don't just rubber stamp them. Look at them with a fine tooth comb. A lot of these DA's office are, they're inundated, like I talked about earlier, and we need some more people out there to help out. You could definitely be part of that. Let me ask each of you, go around the panel real quick, kind of something off topic here. And I'll start with you, Captain Hunter. Name 2 things for me that you like to do, whether it be, golfing, fishing. Name 2 things that you like to do.
I'm a big kid, so I like to play games. I play chess. I play chess, and I probably beaten Jordan a couple of times in video games that he didn't realize he was getting beat by a 47-year-old guy. So that's I enjoy that's what I like to do. I play chess, and I enjoy just playing video games, a lot of shoot 'em up type of games, and I also like to work out as well. So those are 3 things that I like to do.
Okay. Dr. Peters, what about yourself? What do you like to do? 2 things.
So I love to travel, and so have a ticket, we'll go. So I'm hoping to go to Bali in August if I don't know if the COVID virus is going to cooperate. But anyway, I love to travel. I've been to, 27, 28 countries. So I'm a big traveling fan. And I love to read. And so as you guys know, I've written a book with a co-author. And so reading and writing is something that I love to do. And then finally, I just love hanging out with my family. So those are 3 things that I really like to do.
Oh, sorry about that. Brad, 2 things you like to do.
I like to cook.
Oh man, we need to be with you.
Yeah, I love cooking, and I about 6 years ago I became a defensive tactics instructor, and I really enjoy mixed martial arts. And strangely enough, I feel like the better you get at defensive tactics, at weaponless defense, the better cop you are, in the sense that you are more confident going into situations. To kind of spin a little bit off of, we were talking about personal things, but I think a lot of the problems that we have in use of force issues are because cops are scared, and cops are scared because they're not training very well. Departments cut back, and Captain Hunter, I'd like to, I'll hit you up and ask your opinion. Departments have generally, over the last about 10 years, pulled back on weaponless defense training because too many guys get injured and they see that as a liability. But the downside is that when you're not confident in these abilities to try and, grapple with somebody, the fear goes up, and then rash decisions are made. And I think that's where a lot of guys are right now. And you see some of these really bad use of force incidents. Aside from being really ignorant in some ways, these guys are scared and they're not trained. And then sadly, they don't even see that they're poorly trained. So they're not taking it upon themselves to train themselves to be proficient. And I think it leads down this road where you have these really bad use of force incidents, and these guys, it's a function of training.
Yeah, definitely. And Jordan, 2 things you like to do when you're not studying, because I know you swamped with those books, right?
Law school is a lot of work. Outside of school, I like to make music, and then before this coronavirus thing happened, I loved going to concerts. I haven't gone to a concert in like 6 months, so I've kind of replaced that hobby with video games.
All right. So, the reason why I brought this up is just to show our audience and show each other that we're all the same. We all like the same sorts of things. We like playing chess. We like reading. We like traveling. We like playing video games. So we're all the same. And if the more we can kind of think of us that way, the better off we'll be. A couple more questions in here. We got one here from Ty Hunter Jr. for you, Jordan. He asks, what can we as Black parents do to help our children be more successful and goal-oriented?
Man, that's a tough question because I'm not a parent, but
but you are someone that has been parented, right?
Yeah,
and you're a good kid. You've been to college. You're in graduate school. What was it that your parents did?
Giving your kids room to like grow and not kind of force what you want on them. Kind of let them discover their own hobbies and interests, and kind of, I guess, cultivating them and kind of like getting them to move where you want them to go, but not being extremely forceful about it. Kind of like a gentle nudge in the right direction instead of like an abrasive push. Because I think if you get someone going in the right direction, more than likely they'll continue down that path.
All right. And another comment here. Tom Ramirez on Facebook says, seems to agree with you, Brad, on officers' training and confidence as well. And so does another family member. We got a whole bunch of family members on here. Alan Peters. He's out in Florida. He wants to agree with you, Brad. A good point on your officers' training and things like that. I know Brad had a question for you, Captain Hunter, about that. Did you want to kind of expound on what he asked you earlier? Do you remember what that was, or can you ask it again, Brad?
Just the question about, in your department, did you guys kind of cut back on the amount of physical weaponless defense training because of either time or injury or what?
Absolutely, we did. Absolutely, we did. I was nodding my head the whole time you were talking. One of the reasons that I got into and became a defensive tactics instructor is because of the mixed martial arts. It was hot at that time. I'm sure it's still pretty hot, but I wanted to join in. I started going to outside of work, and then we instituted that into our defensive tactics classes. And I was loving it. And then next thing you know, it gets cut, and we would do an in-service training every 3 years. So an officer in Connecticut has to be recertified every 3 years. So every 3 years we had to go to defensive tactics training, and it was 3 days long. So we did our in-service. We did it for 2 weeks, and we went over housing laws and family violence, all this kind of stuff for 2 weeks. And then three of those days was straight defensive tactics. Now it's you're not going to become a mixed martial artist, but it's 3 days of getting training. And as you said, once people start getting hurt, and then overtime starts to come in because now they got to fill your spot for 2 weeks. So we cut it down to 1 week, and of course we eliminated the defensive tactics. But I completely agree that officers are scared. They're ill-equipped to go out. I mean, we do all this training once in the academy, but they don't. If you're not doing anything outside of that, going to any type of martial arts classes, then your confidence level erodes, and next thing you know, you're pulling out your taser, you're pulling out your gun, you're not even trying to de-escalate through verbal judo because you're so amped up because you're scared. So I 100% agree with everything you said, and it's a crying shame. And here we are dealing with this because lack of training, because lack of confidence of officers. And all this kind of stuff. So yeah, I agree.
I've got about as much time on as Brad, and I found us old guys can tend to talk our way a lot more, and we don't have to get into these situations. I don't know if that's a factor of youthful officers wanting to get involved, wanting to jump in, and they don't have that experience. First of all, to be able to talk to people, you're using those verbal skills, and then two, again, not being as proficient. Or in some cases, maybe they think they are proficient. They're overcompensating. They want to show that they know how to do these things. And first thing that we need to do is talk. talk our way out of it. You know, I always say, I'm sure you heard that saying, you catch more flies with sugar than vinegar, right? So you can talk your way out of anything. Got a couple more points here. Looks like Jordan, you answered Ty's question. He said that was a great answer. So he liked that. And VV said, Jordan, go out there and make great things happen. Best wishes to you in your career.
Thank you.
All right. And another comment from Jordan Lovato on Facebook. She asked, are people who are witnessing these horrific events calling the cops to inform others that these events are happening? I'm not sure what event she's talking about. Is she talking about other officers that witness things? Anybody got an idea on that? All right, we will move on.
I'm a little confused by that. So she could write in and just clarify that.
Yeah, Jordan, if you could clarify that, are people who are witnessing these, and it might be a delay between when the stream we actually talk about something and when the comment pops up. So could have been a while ago and we forgot what we were talking about already. So if you're still watching, if you could clarify that, and we'll be on here a few more minutes. She's talking about George Floyd. There she commented. People that are witnessing these things, people that are recording these things afterwards, are they calling the cops? Because like you just said, we talked about earlier, without I think it was you, Tara, that said without these recorded incidents, these things wouldn't be believed. So it seems like most of the time they're just posting them on World Star or YouTube or Facebook or something like that. They're not actually calling the cops about it, calling, internal affairs. Any thoughts on that, panel?
Well, I'll chime in here. I think I'll say two things. One, I think that that we live in a world where people there's a mistrust of police, and so they won't necessarily call the local police department, but they'll post it on Twitter or they'll post it on their Instagram page. And many times these incidents go viral. So a case in point is the 75-year-old in, I believe it's in Buffalo, New York.
Yeah,
that
Buffalo.
Was pushed down. Right. So that video got posted. And, then, the local officials start looking at it. It gets played over and over on the news. And then suddenly the two cops that were involved, they're suspended. There was a response now to the unit with others who now said they're not going to be part of that protest unit. But that's what tends to happen, is that people will post them on social media, and then the videos get picked up by others and they get shared, and then it causes attention to be brought to the issue. I think the question becomes where George Floyd, I've heard this question asked, why didn't people feel like they could do something about the situation? They were videoing, but why didn't people feel like they could intervene in any other way? And, for African Americans, the young girl that was videoing, she wouldn't have thought to try to push the cop over or not try to knock him off, right? She wouldn't have, because she would have then been in fear for her own life. And so a part of this is people responding after the fact because they don't believe that they have the capability in that moment, or God forbid, the outcome if they do is going to be negative, and so they don't take that step.
Yeah, that's the tricky part, is that if you witness something like this and you do intervene, you're not law enforcement. I mean, you could be subject to arrest or worse yourself. So I would implore people, when you see things like this, let it be known, record these things, but then call the cops as well. Call some other cops to come over and stop this stuff as soon as possible, because if you get involved, then bad things more can happen to you. Go ahead, Lawrence.
I'm just going to ask a question. I just wonder if this is going to change because of that George Floyd incident. People were chanting and telling this officer get off his neck. A situation like that happens again, God forbid, obviously. I wonder if the citizens are going to revolt and say, listen, enough is enough, and we're going to attack the police and get this, and we're going to step in and save this man's life. I just wonder if that's going to happen.
Yeah, yeah. He would be alive today if they, or maybe he wouldn't. We don't know. More questions here. Let me get some more in. Lori Knight. I'm sorry I can't pronounce that last name there, which starts with a B. On Facebook, she's asked. She was a cop's wife for 2 decades and will always be a strong supporter for law enforcement. For cops who have been in the profession for a long time, do any of you feel the job changes people, and could more be done from a counseling standpoint? How about you, Brad? What do you think about that?
Yes, the job does change you, or it can, and it seems like the longer you do it, it's really easy to get jaded. And because we deal with 5% of the population 95% of the time, you get a really sour view on humanity, and not realizing the long view that there's so many people out there who are good and we don't get to see them. What could be done? I think, again, I hope this is a watershed moment for a lot of reasons, and I hope one of them is more things get brought up in conversation. Our own mental health, it has become more of an issue in the last few years, just because of a spike in cop suicides. But I think it needs to become more of the conversation about, where's your heart at? Are you in a good place? Are you trying to do the right thing for the right reasons? I will tell you what changed my life and my career was about 7 years ago. A lot of things were happening to me at the time. One of them being a death threat, but that's aside from it. But it brought me to a point where I ended up giving my life to Jesus and building my life upon Him. And that it amazingly changed my life, and it really affected my career. And so in this time right now, we definitely need grace as a profession. And it's starting to become my mission to try and expose more of my police officer counterparts to Jesus. Because I know that if people saw us as righteous people, things would change. And guys would have better lives. They'd have better hearts. And I think a lot of things would change if we could do that.
Yeah. All right. Another comment here from Manny Gonzalez on Facebook. Can you speak upon the issues within minority communities on considering us a sellout, or Uncle Tom Charlie, or he says Uncle Charlie, but Uncle Tom when you become successful, or we are articulate? The fact is that many of us come from the same hood. Anybody want to speak on that? How about you, Jordan? What do you think about that?
I think it's a big issue. I've definitely heard like Uncle Tom and Coon more times in the past 2 weeks than I have in like the past 5 years. But I think it just goes, again, you have to change the culture, and I don't know what we can do specifically to change the culture to get, to get us more receptive of like other arguments from the political aisle. But it just has to come from a change in culture, really, because even before, I don't know, even before I was vocal about my political views, or even before I developed them, as a kid, I was called like Oreo just for the way that I speak and the words that I use. So it's definitely like a culture problem.
Yeah, definitely. How about you, Captain Hunter? What do you think about that?
Yeah, I tend not to pay attention to people who speak like that. I personally have never been called that. When I was in high school, I was called a nerd and stuff like that. But I don't take that kind of stuff seriously. And if anyone would have a conversation with me about that, listen, I have listened to and read just about everything that Malcolm X has written. Read numerous articles in the teachings of Marcus Garvey. So I'm probably one of the blackest people that you'll ever meet. But this idea persists that if you're educated, then you're inarticulate, then you're not really from the hood, you're not one of us. Nothing can be further from the truth. I've read, as I said, Malcolm, Marcus, Dr. King, James Baldwin. I can go on and on, but so I don't pay attention to people who have that. I do agree with Jordan that we need to change the culture for anyone who thinks like that, but hopefully hopefully people don't have that mindset, and they should be taken seriously in the first place.
And lastly, you Dr. Peters.
Yeah, I was going to say that has so many tentacles to it, and so I'll start with the first one. A part of that is really what people are saying sometimes when they make comments like that is it's a function of the fact that you've made it and they haven't, and so or in their mind, and so there's a socioeconomic component that is embedded in that, and so. A part of that, as I think about it, is what opportunities do we have to give back to our communities where people feel like they have been shut out and have not had access. And so I'll give you an example of what that could look like. So a part of my career was spent in K-12 education, teaching, and then a principal for a private Christian K-12 school. Even though we were private, our parents were not necessarily fluent. Many of them would struggle to make tuition payments that were considered to be pretty modest. But one of the things that it gave a chance for us to do is to be inside of communities where they could see people who had become successful, who were educated, and could see that we were there to help and to assist and to partner, and that we were not, looking down on them. We were there to help. And so sometimes that getting involved can help to change those perceptions. But then to Captain Hunter's point, for those who just insist, at some point, you just gotta what is that? Brush your shoulders off or whatever, and
you know what it is.
Right.
You know what it is.
Right. Right, and just keep it moving. So there's that part, too. So, but I have a heart for that because again, I see in my experience that people have been locked out, and so they look at you and they ascribe that characterization to you, but it's really because they don't feel like they've had the opportunity. And sometimes there are ways that we can help with that.
Yeah. And it's really topical now because a lot of, African-American and other minorities, but particularly African-American officers with this whole protest and all this rioting going on are being called Uncle Toms and sellouts and all that. So, how that works on us psychologically, to have to be on both sides, to enforce the law and make sure everyone is safe and still have concern for our community. So, yeah, it's real duplicitous there. Another comment real quick. Minerva Gaines says, Dr. Peters, in your opinion, what can be done to build trust? Also, what are your thoughts on defunding the police? I think we talked about it earlier. Why don't you just talk about the trust piece?
So trust is all about relationships. And so until you build a relationship with people, it's going to be hard to build trust. And because the mistrust extends as a result of police behavior, this goes back to something that Brad said earlier, that the onus is on the police to show themselves to be trustworthy, which means that they have to take the first step and extend the olive branch, if you will, in order to try to reestablish trust inside of communities. The other thing that people have to remember is that just because you extend that olive branch, one, doesn't mean that it's going to be accepted. And two, you have to show that you are in it for the long term. So you can't say, oh, well, we had this meeting and we met with the community, or we went to the protest and we knelt with the people. Okay, that great. But you have to have a longer term commitment. But that is, that's how trust is built, and it's over time, and it's also about being transparent. So you're not hiding the complaint data. You're not protecting bad police officers. So all of that contributes to building trust with the community. And just remember that you didn't erode the trust overnight, and so you won't get it back overnight. But you can start by building relationships inside of communities.
Absolutely. Another comment real quick. Lori Knight, again, the last name eludes me. She says, Brad, thank you for your acknowledgement and response. So, all right. So again, ladies and gentlemen, I appreciate you coming on. I appreciate everyone that was viewing us here on Facebook, YouTube, Periscope, and Twitch. Real good discussion. Any closing remarks? Let's start with you, Jordan, down here. Any closing remarks for the audience?
No closing remarks. I just wanted to thank you, Dale, for having me, and thank you to the panelists. I learned a lot from you guys.
Excellent, excellent. Brad, any closing remarks?
I think this is where we need to transition now. This is what's going to produce healing. And to echo what Dr. Peters said, it can't stop. It has to continue until we reach that point where, like I said, where I look at you and I see me, and you look at me and you see yourself. Until we reach that, we have to keep this conversation going.
Yep. Tara, Dr. Peters.
Well, first of all, I want to say thank you, Dale, for inviting me to be on the panel. What a great platform that you have. This is just so awesome, creating this dialogue. And best wishes to you, Jordan, as you move into your second year of law school. We can't wait to call you Esquire. The thing that I would say is kind of final thoughts is to have a bias for action. And so the conversations are good, but it's required that we act. And those actions are going to be multifaceted. There's so much work to be done, but we must act and then create accountability for those actions that we take.
Yep. And you, Captain Hunter, closing remarks.
Yeah, I just want to say thank you for having me on. I really, really appreciate it. And I appreciate being on the panel with everyone else. That the words were very poignant, salient, to the point. Thank you so much. And I would just finish off by saying, as we others have already said, I believe Brad and Dr. Peters have already said, let me just echo it again, that we cannot let this die. We cannot let this be a flash in the pan. 6 months from now, a year from now, we've got to have that goal and continue to press for it, continue to push for it. The weather's nice now. We're all getting out, and it's fine to be protesting in the street and walking around. What if when the weather turns chilly or rainy or whatever, we've got to keep pushing for it and pushing our legislatures and our politicians to get the reforms that we desperately want.
Excellent, excellent. Well, I'd like to thank everybody for joining me on the panel. I'd like to thank everybody who joined us on Facebook, YouTube, Twitch, and Periscope. Get the word out. This will be uploaded here shortly. So if you want to watch this later, you can go ahead and watch this later. And we'll be doing more discussions like this probably next week. So again, I appreciate everybody. Thank you. Everyone be safe. Everyone on the panel be safe. And Godspeed. We'll talk to you soon. All right.
All right.
Thank you.
Take care, everyone. Okay.
All right. Take care.
Bye.